Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something real today. This is not theory, this is life. This is experience. This is what happens every single time, whether people want to admit it or not. People don't realize what they had until they no longer have access to it. That's human nature. We don't appreciate what's available. We appreciate what's missing. They don't miss you when you're chasing them. They miss you when you're gone. That's a hard truth, but it's a real one. When you are constantly available, constantly explaining yourself, constantly reaching out to keep something alive, people don't feel your value. They feel your presence as a guarantee, and anything that feels guaranteed stops being protected. When you chase, you send an unspoken message that says, I'll stay no matter how I'm treated. And once that message is received, effort starts to disappear, not because you're not enough, but because human nature responds to consequence, not comfort. See, when you're always there, they don't have to wonder about you. There's no mystery. There's no urgency. There's no fear of loss. You answering every call teaches them they don't have to prioritize you. You forgiving the same behavior teaches them they don't have to change. You staying silent about your pain teaches them they don't have to be careful with your heart. Chasing turns love into something predictable, and predictable things get taken for granted. But the moment you stop chasing, something shifts. The moment you stop calling first, stop checking in, stop asking for reassurance, a gap opens up. And that gap is uncomfortable. Silence has a way of forcing people to think. Now they're wondering why you're quiet. Now they're replaying conversations. Now they're noticing your absence where your presence used to be automatic. You didn't change to punish them. You changed to protect yourself, but to them it feels like loss. And that's when missing begins, not when you were pleading to be chosen, but when you chose yourself. Because absence removes access, and access is what they valued without realizing it. They missed the way you showed up, the way you cared, the way you made things easier emotionally. They missed the safety you provided without conditions. And now that safety is gone and they feel exposed. Here's the part people don't like to admit. Some people don't realize how deeply they care until they feel the consequences of not caring enough. When you were chasing, they had power. When you walked away, power shifted, and that shift forces reflection. Now they're asking questions they never asked before. Did I mess this up? Or are they really gone? What if someone else appreciates what I didn't? Chasing keeps people relaxed. Walking away makes them alert. This doesn't mean love is a game. It means love needs balance. When one person is doing all the emotional work, the relationship becomes lopsided, and lopsided love doesn't inspire longing, it inspires laziness. But when you step back, when you reclaim your dignity, when you stop proving your worth, people finally feel what life is like without you. Absence forces clarity in a way that words never can. When you are present all the time, your value blends into the background of someone's life. They get used to your voice, your support, your patience, your forgiveness. It becomes normal, and once something feels normal, people stop examining it. They stop questioning what it would feel like to live without it. That's why explaining yourself over and over rarely works. That's why begging someone to understand you usually fails. Understanding doesn't come from persuasion, it comes from experience. When you step away, when the noise stops, when your messages are no longer lighting up their phone, the mind finally gets quiet enough to think. Silence has a way of turning emotions up instead of down. Now there's space for memories to surface. Now there's time for reflection. They start remembering moments they brushed past when you were there. The laughter, the support, the way you showed up when it wasn't convenient. None of that hits fully while you're still available. It hits when it's gone. Absence removes distraction. When you're no longer there to absorb their stress, their moods, their indecision, they have to sit with themselves. And in that stillness, clarity shows up. They start seeing the patterns they ignored. They start recognizing where they took advantage of your patience. They begin to understand what you were asking for, not because you explained it better, but because now they feel the cost of ignoring it. Clarity doesn't mean instant growth, though. Sometimes clarity shows up as regret before it shows up as change. They realize they mishandled something valuable. They realize you weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person at the wrong time. And that realization can be uncomfortable because it challenges their self-image. It forces them to admit that they didn't lose you because you weren't enough, but because they didn't show up enough. When you were present, they could postpone accountability. There was always tomorrow, always another chance, always another conversation. Absence removes the delay button. Now everything feels final, and finality sharpens focus. It makes people evaluate decisions they were casual about before. They start asking themselves if pride was worth the distance, if ego was worth the loss, if comfort was worth the risk of never getting you back. This is where clarity becomes dangerous, because clarity can lead to genuine understanding or it can lead to panic. Some people don't miss you, they miss the way you made life easier. Some people don't reflect to grow, they reflect to regain control. And absence reveals which one they are. The ones who grow come back changed in behavior, not just words. The ones who panic come back emotional, rushed, and desperate to reset things without fixing the root problem. Still, none of this happens while you're constantly explaining yourself. None of it happens while you're available on demand. Absence is what turns feelings into thoughts and thoughts into realizations. It's what separates habit from appreciation. And whether they come back wiser or just regretful, one thing remains true: your silence did what your presence never could. It made them see clearly. Growth is the moment everything changes, even if you never announce it. When you start leveling up quietly, people who once had easy access to you begin to feel unsettled. They can sense a shift before they can explain it. You're no longer seeking validation from the same places. You're no longer negotiating your worth. You're no longer bending to keep something alive that was draining you. And that internal change sends a loud message without you saying a single word. When someone is used to benefiting from the old version of you, your growth feels like rejection. They were comfortable when you needed them more than they needed you. They were relaxed when your happiness depended on their attention. But when you begin to stand on your own, when you become emotionally independent, it forces them to reassess their position in your life. Now they're not the center anymore. Now they're optional, and nothing wakes up regret faster than becoming optional. Growth exposes imbalance. Suddenly they notice that you're not waiting around. You're not asking the same questions. You're not available the same way. You're not tolerating the same behavior. And that's when memories get rewritten in their mind. They start remembering you as more valuable than they treated you. They start comparing you to everyone else and realizing how rare your consistency was. Growth doesn't beg to be noticed. It gets noticed because it changes the dynamic. This is where ego gets involved. They start wondering how you're doing so well without them. They start questioning their importance. They start asking themselves if they misjudged you. And for some people, that realization is humbling. For others, it's threatening. Because if you're thriving without them, then their absence didn't break you. And that hurts the narrative they had in their head, the one where you were the one who needed them more. Your growth removes the illusion of power they once had. You're no longer reacting. You're responding or not responding at all. You're no longer emotionally predictable, and unpredictability creates curiosity. Curiosity turns into attention. Attention turns into regret. They begin to wonder if they lost something irreplaceable. Not because you told them they did, but because your life shows it. Here's the truth people don't like to hear. Growth doesn't attract everyone back for the right reasons. Some come back because they're inspired. Some come back because they're uncomfortable seeing you move forward. Some come back because they realize they can't do better, not because they want to be better. That's why growth must be protected, because not everyone who returns is meant to stay. When you grow, you stop advertising your pain. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop asking for understanding, and that silence combined with progress is powerful. It makes people reflect on what they lost access to. It makes them realize that the version of you they took lightly no longer exists. And once that realization hits, regret wakes up. When access is removed, reality finally sets in. People rarely value something while they can reach it anytime they want. Easy access creates comfort, and too much comfort creates carelessness. When someone knows they can call you whenever they feel lonely, when they know you'll always respond, always forgive, always make room for them, they don't feel urgency, they feel entitlement. And entitlement slowly erodes appreciation. Removing access doesn't mean you're playing games. It means you're no longer overgiving to someone who undervalues you. The moment you stop being available on demand, the emotional economy changes. Now they can't reach you when it's convenient for them. Now they can't lean on you only when they're bored, stressed, or unsure. And that shift forces them to feel the weight of your absence in moments where you used to carry them. Access is powerful because it creates familiarity. Familiarity makes people forget effort. When access is gone, they start realizing how much they relied on you without acknowledging it. They miss the emotional labor you provided. They miss the way you made space for their moods. They miss the stability you offered without conditions. And now they're feeling the discomfort of standing alone with emotions you used to help manage. This is when desire intensifies, not always because love deepened, but because boundaries appeared. When something becomes unreachable, it suddenly feels more valuable. When something feels limited, it gets prioritized. That's why people start reaching out once they feel distance. That's why messages become longer. That's why apologies sound more dramatic. They're reacting to loss of access, not necessarily loss of connection. Here's where clarity matters on your end. Someone wanting access back doesn't always mean they respect your boundaries. Sometimes it just means they want their comfort back. They want the emotional supply you provided. They want the safety net you represented. And if access is restored without change, the cycle repeats. Comfort returns, effort fades, and you're right back where you started. Removing access is what teaches people how to treat you. It communicates that your time, energy, and presence are not unlimited resources. It resets the value system. When you disappear from the places you were taken for granted, people start reassessing their behavior. They start asking what they did wrong. They start noticing where they crossed lines they thought didn't exist. But here's the part that matters most. Removing access is not about making them miss you. It's about protecting yourself. Missing you is their lesson, not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to honor your worth. And when you do that, the right people respond with respect, not panic. Some will try to negotiate their way back in with words. Others will demonstrate patience, consistency, and effort over time. And the difference between those two responses tells you everything you need to know, because someone who truly values you doesn't just ask for access back, they earn it. Respect is not something people talk about first, but it is something every lasting connection depends on. Love without respect feels good at the beginning, but over time it becomes painful, confusing, and exhausting. When boundaries are weak or constantly crossed, respect quietly disappears, not because someone is evil, but because they learn what they can get away with. Every time you accept behavior that hurts you, every time you stay silent to keep the peace, every time you lower your standards to avoid conflict, you teach people how to treat you. Boundaries are not walls meant to push people away. They are lines that define where you end and someone else begins. When you enforce them, you are not being cold, dramatic, or difficult. You are being clear, and clarity is uncomfortable for people who benefited from your confusion. The moment you say, "This is not okay anymore," the dynamic shifts. Now they can't operate on autopilot. Now they have to be intentional. Most people don't lose respect because they stop caring. They lose respect because nothing changes when they cross the line. If there are no consequences, behavior repeats. That's human nature. Boundaries introduce consequences without needing anger or arguments. You don't have to yell. You don't have to explain yourself 100 times. Your actions speak louder than your words. When you step back, when you remove access, when you no longer reward disrespect with your presence, respect starts to rebuild or the connection fades. This is when things get interesting. Once boundaries are enforced, people reveal who they are. Some get angry, some blame you, some accuse you of changing. That reaction isn't about you becoming different. It's about them losing comfort. They were used to the version of you that tolerated everything. And when that version disappears, they feel challenged. Others respond differently. They listen. They adjust. They make effort. They become more careful with their words and actions. That's respect being born. Not from fear of losing you alone, but from understanding your value. Respect doesn't grow in chaos. It grows in structure. And boundaries create structure. Here's the hard truth: you can love someone deeply and still need to limit their access to you. Love does not require self-betrayal. When you abandon yourself to keep someone else, resentment slowly replaces affection. Boundaries protect love from turning into bitterness. They give relationships a chance to grow in a healthy direction. When you finally enforce boundaries, people who never thought you would leave start paying attention. They start choosing their words more carefully. They start showing up more consistently. They start realizing that your presence is not guaranteed, and that realization shifts behavior more than any emotional speech ever could. Respect is not demanded. It is taught, and it is taught through what you allow and what you refuse. The moment you stop accepting less than you deserve, you send a clear message. Access to you requires effort, consistency, and care. Healing yourself is the most powerful invitation you will ever send, because it changes your energy before it changes your words. When you begin to heal, you stop operating from pain, fear, and insecurity. You stop reacting emotionally to situations that once controlled you, and that shift is noticeable even if you never explain it. People feel it in the way you move, the way you speak, the way you no longer chase validation from the same places. Healing makes you quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need to prove anything. You stop arguing for your worth. You stop replaying old conversations in your head, wondering what you should have said differently. You accept what happened for what it was, not as a reflection of your value, but as a lesson in alignment. And that acceptance brings peace, a peace that many people are not prepared to see you have without them. When you heal, you become emotionally self-sufficient. You still desire connection, but you don't depend on it for stability. You stop needing someone to choose you in order to feel chosen. And that is where the power lies, because the moment someone realizes you no longer need them to be whole, something shifts inside them. They recognize that their presence is no longer a requirement, it's a choice. And being a choice is far more confronting than being needed. Healing also rewrites the story they tell themselves. When you were hurting, when you were reaching out, when you were trying to fix things, it was easier for them to feel important. Your pain gave them relevance. But when you heal, when you move forward without bitterness, when you rebuild your life with calm strength, it challenges their sense of impact. They start wondering why losing them didn't destroy you, and that question lingers. This is where longing often appears, not because they suddenly learned how to love better, but because they see what they lost access to. Healing makes you grounded. It makes you less reactive, more intentional, more discerning. And that version of you is attractive, not just romantically, but energetically. People are drawn to those who are at peace with themselves because peace is rare. Healing also changes your standards. You no longer romanticize potential. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer ignore red flags because you're afraid of being alone. And when someone from your past sees that they can't step back into your life the same way, reality hits. They realize the old doors are closed. They realize the version of you they once had access to no longer exists. Here's the important part. Healing is not done to make someone come back. It's done to free yourself. But ironically, that freedom is what makes people reconsider. When they see you living fully, smiling genuinely, focused on your growth instead of your wounds, they start questioning their decisions. They start comparing the peace you now carry with the chaos they live in. And that contrast is loud. However, healing also gives you clarity. You're no longer impressed by words alone. You're no longer swayed by emotional apologies or sudden attention. You understand that consistency is the only apology that matters. Healing sharpens your intuition. You can sense whether someone wants you back to build something new or to escape their own discomfort. And that's the final transformation healing brings: discernment. You stop reopening doors that once broke you. You stop mistaking nostalgia for love. You stop sacrificing your peace for familiarity. Healing doesn't just change how others see you. It changes what you allow. At that point, whether they come back or not no longer defines you, because healing has already given you something far more valuable than their return. It has given you yourself.